Good morning, everyone. This is Miss Kirkland. I apologize for missing class last night. It was unavoidable and very unexpected, but I would just say that everyone is okay, and I will explain later. So we are going to have to catch up, and we're going to do it this way. So what I'm going to do is just do a voice overlay of the PowerPoint from last night, and we will just take it from there. First off, UBDs. You guys got an extra week on that, so I will most definitely collect your UBDs and all the information that goes with it next Thursday. Just a heads up, we will get out of class early Thursday at 5:30, and Miss Scruggs will begin early at 5:30. So you guys should be able to get home in time to take kids trick-or-treating if you want to. Very, very important homework for next week. This PowerPoint is going to be posted on the discussion board. You need to watch it and reply to get attendance. You have your regular discussion board post as well. You also need to go into our Blackboard course content and the MathMates. I want you to print out the MathMates example and the MathMates interview notes. So make sure you have both of those for next week. We are also going to double up. MathMates Activity 1 and 2 will be due November the 7th. That is the student interview and shadowing a student. So what you need to be doing this week is just maybe having in mind a student you want to work with, to do your MathMates with. The student needs to be different from you in two ways: race, sex, social economic status, just different from you in two ways, and it will be a student who struggles in math. Having said that, you do not want to choose one that cannot do grade level math. You just want to choose one that struggles. If you need any help selecting a student, ask your teacher. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about adding, subtracting, and multiplying and dividing fractions. There are multiple ways to teach every math skill. You always want to start with a visual model. You should also strive to develop number sense. Once you have modeled and taught the students the number sense methods, then you may show them an easier way. Common mistakes students make: they add both the numerators and the denominators, ignoring the denominators, difficulty finding common multiples, difficulty with mixed numbers. Students subtract the smaller fraction from the larger fraction. Students place an 8 as the numerator for the whole number, so 4 would be rewritten as 3 and 8/8 rather than 4. You have to rewrite it, and they only work with whole numbers. So this is not a hard lesson. It's just basic fractions, and then we're going to go over algorithms. Teaching tip: avoid referring to the top number and the bottom number when speaking about fractions. This language reinforces overgeneralization of the whole number thinking. Not only that, that's not the vocabulary the students are going to encounter on a test. So always use numerator and denominator when you're discussing fractions. Composing and decomposing fractions. Composing fractions obviously is just adding, like if you have 1/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5. When you are adding fractions, to begin with, to add or subtract fractions, the denominator has to be the same. If it is, it's going to be a whole lot easier, so you just simply add. That's 3/5, and then decomposing is just taking it apart. 1/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5. This is actually a really good activity to do with your students because it's not difficult, not as much as the other activities we'll get into a little bit later, but it does help them to visualize things a lot. The 4 and 2/3, that 4, you have to rewrite that. You see the denominator in the fraction 2/3. So if you rewrite 4, you would rewrite 4 as 3 and 3/3. And then you would say 3 and 3/3 plus 2/3. So that is how you would do that. And I'll answer any questions you have about this next week. Scaffolding. What skills are required, I will say there are a lot of skills required before you teach uncommon denominators. First off, they have to know their multiplication facts. They will not succeed without it. They have to know the terms least common multiple and greatest common multiple. They have to understand the concept of simplifying and reducing, changing a mixed number to an improper fraction, or changing an improper fraction to a mixed number. So those skills are required, and sometimes when you start teaching uncommon denominators, you realize the students are lacking, and you sort of have to put the lesson on pause and back up and reteach a mini lesson. If you do that one year, then that will become part of your plan to teach it the next year. So that's always something that once you've done it once, you know, okay, I got to do this before I do that. Big thing, always, this is what I want you to take away from this class. When you're teaching math, you always begin with the concrete and you go to the abstract. If you do not have access to real manipulatives, use virtual manipulatives. If you do not have access to either, then draw pictures. You do not just want to get up there and start talking about fractions, sort of like this, this activity is doing. But don't worry, we'll get to some pictures here in a few minutes. But you don't want to just talk and talk and talk. You want to show and demonstrate and model and have the students to do that as well. Start easy. Here are some ways to decompose fractions. You can just see some work samples, the way you could do it in your class. Good way to do this is to put the students with a partner. I would do high-low on this, because if the high student gets it, they can also help reteach to the lower students as well. And you might even have, you can buy cubes with fractions on it, which would be fabulous manipulative to have if you're teaching grades. Keep in mind, fractions are really not going to hit hard until 4th grade. Fractions will overtake math in 4th grade. It is the big takeaway in math that year will be fractions. 1/4, 1/2, and 3/4 is introduced in 3rd grade. This is just a link about visual methods. I think I pulled this up last week to show you some different, let's see if it'll pull up this week. Here we go. You can just pick some different things that you want to do with your students. Numbers and operations. It's got different manipulatives in it. You see your base 10. Here you have the fraction bars. Here you have naming fractions, visualizing fractions. Just if you're going to, okay, and my Java's out of date. Of course it is. We're going to do that later. I don't think it's going to pull up, but this is a really good site, so you might want to play with it. And just make sure, oh, well, there we go. There we go. So you can see. Show this fraction by dividing it into, and then you can click check, and you can just see the different things. Oh, it's going to let you. It's wanting you to divide it into 11 pieces. There we go. So there you go. That did work out. That was pretty neat. A good website for you to use with your students if you have access to technology. All right. Okay. Prereqs, look down below on the bottom, as we talked about a while ago, factors, multiples, and facts. And guys, if your students, you have to teach fractions. If you're in 4th grade and you get to the point where you have to teach fractions and your students do not know their multiplication tables, you have to teach fractions anyway. It is a state objective. So what do? Well, at the beginning of the year, like on day 1, you start doing fact practice, finding out who knows their facts and who does not. Do not hesitate to call those parents. Get those parents up there, have phone conversations with them. Be very nice, but help them to understand that the students will not pass 4th grade if they do not use their facts. Know their facts. Do not provide a crutch. Do not give them a multiplication table and let them use that, because what's going to happen at the end of the year when you take that away and they have to take that test? Well, their class grades are not going to align with their grades that they make on the state test, which will get you in trouble with your administrator. So sometimes you have to call in the forces, and that will be family. It may be parents, maybe grandparents, maybe an aunt or an uncle, or if all else fails and it's just you, then maybe you'll have a student teacher, and you can assign that student teacher to help that student with their facts before or after school each day. Traditional algorithm. Now guys, I'm going to show you several algorithms tonight about adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing fractions. And I promise you're going to like them, and you're going to want to use them immediately, but you cannot. In order for the students to develop this number sense that you hear me talk about all the time, they have to understand the traditional algorithm. Here we have a problem, 2/3 and 4/7. So first thing we got to do is find a least common denominator. Well, what I would always get my students to do is to write down the 3 and the 7 and write the multiples. When they find the smallest number in common, that is the least common multiple. Another trick is to just say 3 times 7, which is 21. Just so happens that is the least common multiple for 3 and 7. That will not be the case all the time, but it will always work. It just means that they may have to simplify it in the future. So that's how you can begin. Again, find the least common multiples, or just say the two denominators times themselves. But again, they have to know the facts or this will not happen. Now, here's the Pinterest algorithm that I found, and it's the butterfly method. And you're going to like it, and your students will too, but really it does not have a lot of number sense involved. So what do? You can see here you have 3/4 plus 2/5. What you're going to do is you're going to cross multiply 3 and 5 right here. Put the 15 up here. That becomes the little antenna for the butterfly. 4 times 2 becomes the 8. Then 4 times 5 is 20. That gets 23 over 20. You can never, ever, ever leave that as an answer. They do not get credit. They always have to simplify it. But there again, what are the problems with this algorithm? Other than the fact it does not develop as an efficient number sense, it's got a lot of steps in it, guys. So the kids actually have to memorize the steps to cross multiply, and again have to know the multiplication tables to say the bottom two times each other. But I'm not against using algorithms in your classroom. I just very firmly believe that you should use a traditional algorithm first, okay? And obviously they would want to put this in their math notebook. Okay, we're going to skip that. Let's talk about fraction regrouping. Fraction regrouping, maybe you've never heard that term before, but look at this problem. 5, you have a whole number minus a mixed number. How do you work that problem? Well, you have to regroup. And the slide that I skipped before, basically is just saying, yes, you regroup in addition and subtraction just like you do in fractions. But the regrouping just basically is the rewriting of the 5. And again, you look at the denominator of the fraction you are given, and it's a 5, right? So 5 over 5 is 1. So to rewrite this whole number as a mixed number, you would say 5 over 5, and that is what fraction regrouping is called. It's not a hard concept. Kids actually catch on to that pretty quickly. You just have to take the time and show it to them. You would want to isolate this skill and just work with doing this with your students before they actually have to do this in a problem. And again, put it in that math notebook. Okay, multiplying and dividing. Let's look at this. Estimating approximate size of fractions and answers. Work this problem. Is the answer the product less or greater than the factors? And that is just, sometimes you see questions like that in a math book and you're thinking, why can't I just work the problem? And if you multiply the fractions, you just, let's just keep going and I'll show you. That's the best way to do it. Okay, here we have a model. This is a area model, and students like this a lot. You can actually draw, like the problem is 2/3 times 3/4. So what you do is you draw one square and divide it into 2/3 and shade it, okay? For this, I would use like light colored pencils. I would not get crayons out because it's hard to write on top of crayons, and definitely not markers. And then you're going to go the opposite direction with 3/4. Well, when you combine that, and you would do this onto the same square, you ask yourself the questions. How many boxes have both colors? 6. So that's your numerator. And then how many boxes are there in all? 12. So that's your answer. 6/12. And then when you reduce that, you get that that is a half. So going back to the other question, is your answer going to be greater or less than? Well, when we get a half, half is obviously less than 2/3 or 3/4. So that's a really neat way. If you've not seen that, try it. You'll like it, and it's a really good way to help. This really helps the students understand the concept of numerator and denominator. Helps them a whole lot. Numbers get smaller when you're dealing with fractions. Illustrate this with an array. I really hate that I'm not in class to enjoy showing you guys how to do the lattice method with fractions, but let me save you some pain. Don't do this with your students. It is much more trouble than it's worth. Why am I showing you this? Just because it was in the book, and I wanted you to be aware of the fact this is an algorithm that you can use, but it is not one that I suggest. Simplifying the expressions. Here you've got to multiply these problems. So how are you going to do this? Well, they are basically decomposing this and then working with it if it makes it easier. You know, it may be easier. If I was teaching this, I would just teach them to do the 4 times 2 is 8 plus 3 equals 8/4, and the 3 times 1 is 3 plus 1 is 4/3, and then multiply. But this again just shows them how to decompose it and breaks it down for you. The traditional algorithm on fractions here, and I've always found this kind of interesting because actually dividing fractions is just multiplying fractions. All you're going to do is flip that second fraction and then multiply. So that's basically how you do that. Just flip that last fraction and go at it like you would the regular way. Okay, why are fractions important to everyday life? Why do we have to learn this in the words of a student? Think about this. How many times a day do you have to divide a workload, drive a car? How far can you go on a fourth of tank of gas, or even plan a meal? Think about that. If you're cooking a meal, you have to use measuring cups. You have to use spoons. Who uses math? Everyone uses math. Architects, engineers, doctors, nurses, artists, musicians. Did you know that a lot of fabulous musicians have to have math? And the reason that they'll go to college and they'll major in music and they'll end up dropping music because they get to this class called music theory. One guess what is embedded in music theory? Math, math, math. So before you begin teaching math, remember, you got to have a growth mindset. You need to go in with a positive attitude, and you need to relate it back to the real world, because some of those students, I don't care if you're teaching 3rd grade, they're already going to be jaded, and they're going to look at you and tell you, I'm not good at math. That would be a very good question to put on an interest inventory, because if a student tells you they're not good at math, then they probably already at that young age has developed a fixed mindset, and it's your job to try and change that. Using the real world is a wonderful way to do that. When teaching fractions, take it slow, build up to the next skill, make it hands-on. Then we have this foldable, which, because I missed last week, we were going to make it in class. This is always something that the students are very proud of to take with them. And what I'm going to do is actually make it for you, so I'll have it for you. It's another foldable, but you see it opens up and it's going to show you different ways to multiply, like on the bottom when you're multiplying fractions. You do not have to worry about common denominators when you're multiplying or dividing, okay? You just multiply straight across and simplify. Again, on the dividing, you're going to flip that second fraction and then multiply straight across. The adding and subtracting is harder because you have to get a common denominator. But this is a wonderful handout that I know will be very meaningful to you. And I know from the past that people definitely keep up with it because they want to use it in their classrooms. So again, I will have that for you. Assignments, Khan Academy. Let's see, 5 assignments. And I've already checked Khan Academy. You guys are doing great. Most of you have already completed all of yours. We've got your UBD is due next week. That's got 1025. Obviously, I will get it next week. MathMates, make sure you have all of that MathMates materials printed out when you come to class because I will be with you there to do that as well. We do that TOTS meeting. I forgot to take that off, so do not pay any attention to that. Okay, guys, that is it. Make sure you post down below. Give me a comment about the lesson and do your other discussion board. And I will see you next Thursday night at 4:30. And again, class will end early. Have a great day. Thank you.